Hello, this is Jerry Cheng from DP1. The real-life situation of my TOK presentation is the Paris Climate Accord. So the Paris Climate Accord is an accord held in Paris, in France, that aims to combat global warming. The accord encourages countries around the world to establish new laws regarding pollution. To reach these ambitious goals, appropriate financial flows, a new technology framework, and an enhanced capacity building framework will be put in place, thus supporting action by developing countries and the most vulnerable countries in line with their own national objectives. But it is interesting how on one of the elements of the accord, one of the agreements, it says developed countries parties should continue taking the lead by undertaking economy-wide absolute emission reduction targets. Developing countries parties should continue enhancing their mitigation efforts and are encouraged to move over time towards economy-wide emission reduction or limitation targets in the light of different national circumstances. So what I think of this particular agreement is that the developed countries are taking more burden, while the developing countries take less responsibilities towards the combating of global warming. Therefore, I've come up with my knowledge question. How do ethics determine the responsibilities of different countries? This question presents two conflicting perspectives. On the one hand, people can say that developed countries should take more responsibilities because they polluted in the past. What's more, some will suggest that developed countries just should take more responsibilities because they have better technology than the less developed ones. However, on the other hand, others might suggest that the fact that developed countries polluted in the past doesn't give them more responsibilities because the technologies decades ago could not justify that pollution is bad. So it was okay for them to pollute. It's only until recent decades that we found a way to trace the carbon dioxide emission and to say that it is not right to pollute that much. Therefore, all countries should share equal responsibilities because they all have the choice of producing pollution. Before answering these questions, I will explore the historical development of global warming and then the methodologies related to ethical framework that can justify the two different perspectives. Lastly, I will discuss about a mini real-life situation about how America is withdrawing from the accord and why they did that. So first, a historical background on the global warming. So it is probably a common knowledge of the cause of global warming, the greenhouse gas. Approximately 2/3 of all industrial methane and carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere since 1854 can be traced to burning fossil fuels and producing cement. In the past, it was difficult for scientists to measure the amount of CO2 produced, but now they can. So now the CO2 emission is at its highest peak throughout the whole entire human history, which further worsened the greenhouse gas effect. Earth is becoming warmer and warmer. In fact, recent data shows that global carbon dioxide emission were 150 times higher in 2011 than they were in 1850. Since burning fossil fuels is usually a sign of heavy industry, carbon dioxide emissions can also serve as a method of measuring a country's economic growth. Nonetheless, a reduction in global greenhouse gas emissions is an important objective of not only the environmentalists, but of every humanitarian-oriented and environmentally conscious state in the world. It's everyone's job. Countries that are producing the most CO2 are China, the US, the UK, Russia, Japan, and Brazil, and many other developed countries. This is when the Paris Climate Accord, my real-life situation, comes into play. It acts as a catalyst that helps countries to reduce their carbon dioxide emission by regulating the amount of emission and using technologies to reduce the amount of emission. So now Now that you have more understanding on my RLS, I would like to conduct analysis on the two perspectives regarding this issue. So the two perspectives are first, developed countries should take the lead of reducing pollution, and the second one is developed countries have the same responsibilities as the developing countries. So they have the same responsibility. And the two methodologies of ethical framework I'm going to use is one, the utilitarianism, and two, the Kantian ethics. So the first perspective could be justified with the utilitarianism, which falls into the consequentialist ethics. So utilitarianism focuses on the outcome of an act instead of the process. And the principle that propels the action. So that if the action can produce happiness as an outcome, it is readily permissible. For example, if a doctor only has 5 doses of a particular medicine left, and there are 6 dying patients, one need 5, and the rest only need 1, the doctor should save the 5 and let the 1 die, because it maximizes happiness and minimizes suffering. And in this case of air pollution, countries that are more developed should take the lead of reducing carbon dioxide emission, because since they are the ones that emitted much of the carbon dioxide in the past. If all countries, developed or not, are to share the same responsibility, it would be very unfair because the developing countries didn't contribute much in the past. Happiness will be maximized if developed countries take more responsibilities. Because first, the developed countries already enjoy from producing a lot of pollution in the past because now they are developed, and so they naturally have the responsibility to take more burden. For the developing countries, although they are also responsible, but since they are not as lucky as the developed countries who are already developed, they are allowed to produce more pollution and take less responsibilities. So the second perspective can be justified with the Kantian ethics, which falls into the deontological ethics. So Kantian ethics is basically the opposite of utilitarianism. Deontological ethics is the opposite of consequentialist ethics. Kantian ethics focuses more on the principle of the act. So, for example, a bartender can choose to give less change to the customer because the customer is new, but he's not going to do it because because it's just morally not correct, and it's simply wrong. So in this case, it is true that the developed countries probably have emitted more pollution in the past and are happier than those in the developing countries because they're already developed, but they should not take more responsibilities because it's simply not motivated by the goodwill. The developed ones that are equally responsible as the developing ones, because it is not right for them to produce more pollution, the developing ones to produce more pollution than their developed counterparts. Both countries are standing on the same line. They are both in the Paris Climate Accord and agree to minimize pollution. So they should take equal responsibility. Now I would like to introduce a mini real-life situation, America's withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord. So the new president of the United States, Donald Trump, consistently he declared that America is going to get out of the agreement because it is unfavorable to the nation. And many blame him for making this irrational decision. But actually, this act can be justified using the utilitarian ethics. If the nation is not going to benefit from the accord, why should the nation participate? The consequences of U.S. decision is not going to be happy. It's not going to achieve happiness. It's not going to benefit the country. And that is why President Trump says the United States is withdrawing unless we can re-enter on terms that are more favorable to our country. So overall, I think that although Kantian ethics is reasonable and And what Donald Trump said is also reasonable. I think the utilitarianism ethics is is a better one to choose for this matter. As what the Paris Climate Accord says, developed countries should take the lead of reducing pollution. Same for the developing countries, but they're less responsible. Utilitarianism is a better methodology to go with because it will yield better result in the long run, in the long future. Countries that are more developed should, in the end, take more responsibilities.